How do you lose everything in a single night? I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing as if I'd just sprinted a marathon. The clock on my nightstand glowed 2:13 a.m., a time I'd normally be asleep, nestled beside my wife, Sarah, with our two kids, Emma and Jake, asleep in their rooms. But something felt off, like the air in the room was too thick, suffocating. I reached out to touch Sarah, to feel the comforting warmth of her body next to mine, but my hand met only cold, empty sheets. I blinked in the darkness, my eyes struggling to adjust. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice trembling, barely a whisper. The silence that answered was deafening. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet meeting the familiar chill of the hardwood floor. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that sets your nerves on edge. "Sarah? Emma? Jake?" My voice grew louder, the panic creeping in as I checked each room in quick succession. Emma's room was empty, her bed neatly made, just as it was when I tucked her in earlier. Jake's room was the same, his favorite stuffed bear sitting on the pillow where his head should have been. The bathroom, the kitchen, the living room, empty, all empty. My breath came faster as I grabbed my phone, the screen nearly blinding me in the darkness. I called Sarah first. It rang and rang until the voicemail picked up, her cheerful voice telling me to leave a message. I tried again. Nothing. I dialed her parents next, figuring they might have heard from her. No answer there either. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Finally, I dialed my mother's number, feeling a strange mix of dread and hope. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Maybe Sarah had called her, told her something that would make sense of this nightmare. She picked up after the second ring. "Mom, it's me," I blurted out, my voice shaky. "Have you heard from Sarah? Or the kids? I can't find them anywhere." There was a pause on the other end, so long that I almost thought the call had dropped. Then, my mother's voice came through, soft and confused. "Honey, what are you talking about?" "Sarah and the kids, they're gone. I can't find them. Have you heard from them?" Another pause. "John, you're not making any sense. You've never been married. You don't have any children." My mother's words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" "That's not funny, Mom. I'm serious. I can't find them, and I'm losing my mind here." "John," she said gently, "I don't know what's going on, but you've never been married. You've always lived alone in that house." For a moment, I just stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. How could she say that? How could she deny the existence of my family? The memories of Sarah, Emma, and Jake were as real as the blood pumping through my veins. "I don't understand," I whispered, my legs suddenly feeling like they might give out beneath me. "They were here, Mom. I remember everything. The day I met Sarah, our wedding, the births of Emma and Jake. How can you say they never existed?" "I'm worried about you, John. Maybe you should come over and we can talk. You don't sound like yourself." The world around me seemed to tilt, the walls of the house closing in. "I need to find them," I muttered, hanging up before she could say another word. I was losing my grip, but I couldn't accept what she was saying. I couldn't. I ran out of the house, hoping that maybe one of my neighbors might have seen something, might be able to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. I banged on the door of the house across the street, where Mr. and Mrs. Patterson lived. They had watched Emma and Jake play in the yard more times than I could count. If anyone knew where they were, it had to be them. Mr. Patterson opened the door, his face bleary with sleep and confusion. "John? What's going on? It's the middle of the night." "Mr. Patterson, have you seen Sarah or the kids?" "They're gone, and I can't find them. Did you see them leave? Did they say anything to you?" He frowned, looking at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Sarah? Kids? John, what are you talking about? You've always lived alone. I've never seen anyone else in that house with you." I staggered back, shaking my head. No, that's not right. You've seen them. They were just here yesterday, playing in the yard." "John, you need to calm down," he said, stepping closer, concern etched on his face. "Are you sure you're okay?" Maybe you should see a doctor." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "This isn't happening," I whispered to myself, turning and running back to my house. The night air was cold against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing, every thought colliding with the next. I burst through the front door, calling out their names again, even though I knew it was pointless. The house was empty, silent, as if they had never been there. But they had been. I knew they had. I could see Sarah's smile in my mind, hear Emma's laughter, feel Jake's small hand in mine. How could they just disappear? How could everyone else forget they existed? Desperation clawed at me as I searched the house again, looking for any trace of them, anything to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. I found nothing, no clothes in the closets, no toys in the kids' rooms, no photos on the walls. It was as if they had been erased from existence. But that was impossible. It had to be. I slumped down on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of the madness. Maybe I was dreaming, maybe this was some kind of nightmare, and I would wake up any second now to find Sarah beside me, her hand on my shoulder, telling me it was all just a bad dream. But as the minutes ticked by, the reality of my situation began to sink in. This wasn't a dream, this was real, and I was completely alone. I spent the next few days searching for answers, visiting everyone I knew, anyone who might remember my family, but it was always the same. No one remembered them, no one believed me. I started to question everything I knew, everything I remembered. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? But the memories were too vivid, too real to be just a figment of my imagination. As the days turned into weeks, I withdrew into myself, barely eating, barely sleeping. The house that had once been filled with the sounds of my family now felt like a tomb, cold and empty. And then, one night, as I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, I heard it, a faint whisper, a voice that sounded like Sarah's. "John." I sat up, my heart pounding. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice trembling. But there was no answer, just the silence of the house. I lay back down, trying to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. "John." I bolted out of bed, following the sound of her voice down the hallway, my heart racing. It led me to Emma's room, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, my breath catching in my throat as I stepped inside. The room was empty, just as it had been for weeks, but I could feel her presence, like she was right there with me. "Where are you?" I whispered, my voice cracking. For a moment, there was nothing, and then I heard it again, a soft, almost inaudible whisper. "Help us!" The words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know how, but I knew in that moment that they were still out there, somewhere, waiting for me to find them. I couldn't explain it, couldn't make sense of it, but I knew I couldn't give up. I had to find them, no matter what it took. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the house, determined to find my family. I didn't know where to start, didn't have any leads, but I knew I couldn't stay there, surrounded by the memories of a life that everyone else had forgotten. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them standing in the driveway, waving goodbye, but there was nothing, just the empty road behind me. For weeks, I traveled from town to town, searching for any sign of them, any clue that might lead me to where they were. But no matter where I went, it was always the same. No one knew them, no one remembered them. It was like they had been erased from existence, like they had never been real. But I knew better. I knew they were out there, waiting for me. And I wouldn't stop until I found them. I spent the following weeks in a state of delirium, drifting from place to place, following the faintest of leads, clinging to the hope that my family was still out there, somewhere. The whispers I had heard in the house haunted me, growing louder and more frequent as the days passed. "Help us!" I couldn't sleep, couldn't think of anything but those two words. They echoed in my mind, urging me on, driving me to the brink of madness. I started seeing Sarah and the kids everywhere, in the faces of strangers on the street, in the reflections in shop windows. But whenever I tried to approach them, they would vanish, leaving me alone and disoriented. My search led me to a small, rundown motel on the outskirts of a town I didn't even know the name of. I had been driving aimlessly for hours, my vision blurred with exhaustion. When I saw the neon sign flickering in the distance, the place looked deserted, but I was too tired to care. I just needed a place to rest, to gather my thoughts before continuing my search. The motel lobby was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic. The receptionist, an elderly woman with hollow eyes, barely glanced at me as I checked in. She handed me a key without a word, her bony fingers brushing against mine with a chill that sent a shiver down my spine. The room she gave me was small and sparsely furnished, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a cracked mirror on the wall. I collapsed onto the bed, my body aching with fatigue, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was racing, filled with images of Sarah and the kids, their faces twisted in fear, their voices calling out to me in desperation. "Help us!" The whisper was so close this time, I could almost feel Sarah's breath on my ear. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of her, but there was nothing, just the same empty, lifeless space. Frustration and despair gnawed at me, and I screamed, a primal sound that tore through the silence of the night. I couldn't take it anymore, couldn't bear the thought of spending another moment in this endless, torturous limbo. But just as I was about to give up, to resign myself to the fact that I might never see my family again, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement in the mirror. I turned to face it, my breath catching in my throat as I saw them, Sarah, Emma, and Jake, standing together in the reflection, their eyes wide with fear, their faces pale and gaunt. "Sarah," I whispered, stepping closer to the mirror, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch it. But as soon as my fingers brushed against the glass, their images flickered and distorted, like a bad signal on a TV. I pulled my hand back, my heart racing, and watched in horror as their faces twisted into grotesque masks of agony, their mouths opening in silent screams. "Help us!" Sarah's voice was a ghostly whisper, barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. "What happened to you?" I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. "Where are you?" But they didn't answer. Instead, their images began to fade, the light in their eyes dimming until all that was left were hollow, empty sockets. "No!" I screamed, pounding my fist against the glass. "Don't leave me! Please, don't leave me!" But it was too late. They were gone, and I was alone again. I stumbled back, my knees giving out beneath me as I collapsed onto the bed, tears streaming down my face. I didn't understand what was happening, didn't know if any of this was real or if I was just losing my mind. But I knew one thing for certain, I couldn't give up. I had to find them, had to save them from whatever hell they were trapped in. The next morning, I packed my things and left the motel. The images of my family in the mirror burned into my mind. I had no idea where to go, no leads to follow. But I knew I couldn't stay in that place any longer. The whispers had stopped, but the memory of them lingered, driving me forward, pushing me to keep searching, no matter how hopeless it seemed. I spent weeks on the road, moving from town to town, following the faintest of leads, chasing shadows in the hopes that they would lead me to my family. But it was always the same. No one knew them, no one remembered them, and I was left feeling more alone and desperate than ever. As the days turned into weeks and then months, I began to lose hope. The search had taken everything from me, my sanity, my health, my will to live. I was a shadow of my former self, a man haunted by the ghosts of a family that might never have existed. But just when I was about to give up, when I was ready to accept that I might never see them again, I found a clue, something that gave me hope, something that made me believe that I might not be as crazy as everyone thought. I was in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, when I came across an old man sitting on a bench outside a diner. He was hunched over, his face lined with age and sorrow, his eyes distant and unfocused, but there was something about him that caught my attention, something familiar that I couldn't quite place. I approached him cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. "Excuse me," I said, my voice hoarse from days of disuse. "Do you know me?" The old man looked up at me, his eyes narrowing as he studied my face. For a moment, I thought he might be just another person who would tell me I was crazy, that I had never had a family, that I had always been alone. But then he spoke, his voice raspy and broken. "You're John," he said, his words sending a jolt of recognition through me. "You were here before." I frowned, my mind racing. "Before? What do you mean? When was I here?" The old man shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "I don't know, it's been so long, but I remember you. You were looking for someone. "My family," I said, my voice trembling. "Do you remember them? My wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids, Emma and Jake?" The old man's eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition in them. Yes, I remember them. They were here with you, weren't they?" I felt a surge of hope, my heart racing. "Yes. That's right. But where are they now? Do you know what happened to them?" The old man's face fell, and he shook his head again, his expression filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry, son, I don't know. I just remember they were here, and then they were gone, just like that." My heart sank, and I felt the familiar despair creeping in, but before I could give in to it, the old man spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "But there's someone you should talk to, someone who might know more. She's different, though, not like the others." "Who?" I asked, desperate for any information, any lead that might bring me closer to finding my family. The old man hesitated, his eyes darting around as if he were afraid of being overheard. Well, some folks call her a witch, but I don't know what she is. All I know is that she knows things that no one else knows." "Where can I find her?" I asked, my heart pounding with anticipation. The old man gave me directions to a small, isolated cabin on the outskirts of town, warning me to be careful, to approach her with respect. I thanked him and set off immediately, my mind racing with the possibility that I might finally get some answers. The drive to the cabin was long and winding, the road narrow and overgrown with weeds. By the time I arrived, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The cabin itself was small and weathered, its windows dark and uninviting. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the door, before finally summoning the courage to knock. The sound echoed through the silent forest, and for a moment, I thought there might be no one home. But then the door creaked open, revealing a woman standing in the doorway. She was older than I had expected, her face lined with age, her hair a wild tangle of gray. But there was something in her eyes, something sharp and knowing, that made me believe she might be able to help me. "You're looking for something," she said, her voice low and raspy. I nodded, my heart pounding. "My family, my wife and kids, they disappeared, and no one remembers them but me. I need to find them. Can you help me?" The woman studied me for a long moment, her gaze piercing, as if she were looking into my soul. Finally, she stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. "Come in, then, we have much to discuss." The inside of the cabin was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of herbs and something more ancient, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The woman led me to a small table in the center of the room, gesturing for me to sit. She moved with an eerie grace, her eyes never leaving mine as she began to gather various items from the shelves lining the walls. Candles, bones, jars filled with strange, unidentifiable substances. As she arranged them on the table, I felt a growing sense of unease, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the hope that she might be able to help me. After what felt like an eternity, she finally sat down across from me, her gaze intense, her hands steady as she lit the candles and began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the crackling of the flames, and I began to wonder if this was all a mistake, if I had let desperation drive me to a dead end. But then, just as I was about to speak, I felt it, a shift in the air, a ripple that seemed to pass through me, making my skin prickle. The woman's voice grew louder, more urgent, and I could feel the energy in the room intensify, like a storm building on the horizon. The candles flickered, their flames growing taller and more erratic, casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. And then, suddenly, everything went still. The woman stopped chanting, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. "They are trapped," she said, her voice low and reverberating with power, "between worlds, lost in a place where time and memory have no meaning. They call out to you because you are the only one who can bring them back." "How?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear and hope. "How do I bring them back?" The woman reached out, her hand cold as ice as she placed it over mine. "You must go to them, cross the boundary between our world and theirs, but be warned, the journey is perilous, and there is no guarantee you will return." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "I don't care," I said, my voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes to bring them back." The woman nodded, her expression grave. "Very well, but know this, you must find the anchor that binds them to that place. Only then can you break the spell and bring them home. But beware, for the anchor is also the key to their imprisonment, and it will not be easily relinquished." With that, she rose from the table, moving to a cabinet in the corner of the room. From it, she retrieved a small, ornate box, its surface covered in intricate carvings. She placed it in front of me, her eyes dark and unreadable. "This will guide you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but you must be strong, for the path ahead is fraught with danger. Trust in your love for them, for it is the only thing that will see you through." I took the box, my hands shaking, and nodded. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with gratitude and determination. "I'll find them, I promise." The woman watched me with a somber expression as I stood and made my way to the door. Just as I was about to leave, she spoke one last time, her voice carrying an ominous warning. "Remember, John, once you cross over, there is no turning back. You will be in their world, and the rules there are not the same as ours. Be careful, and be quick, for time moves differently in that place. If you linger too long, you may become lost as well." I nodded, my resolve firm, and stepped out into the night, the box clutched tightly in my hands. The journey to the place where my family was trapped was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The box guided me, its carvings shifting and changing, showing me the way through forests and across rivers, through towns that seemed to exist outside of time. The world around me grew stranger with each passing day, the landscape shifting and warping, as if reality itself were unraveling. I could feel the pull of the other world growing stronger, the boundary between our world and theirs growing thinner. The whispers that had haunted me for so long grew louder, more insistent, urging me forward, guiding me toward the place where my family was trapped. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the boundary, a shimmering veil of light that seemed to ripple like water, stretching across the horizon as far as the eye could see. I knew, instinctively, that this was the threshold between worlds, the place where I would find my family. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The moment I touched the veil, a shock of electricity shot through me, and the world around me dissolved into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the forest. Instead, I found myself standing in a strange, desolate landscape. The sky is sickly yellow, the ground cracked and barren, the air was thick with the stench of decay, and the only sound was the faint whispering of the wind. I knew, without a doubt, that I had crossed over into the other world, the place where my family was trapped. I walked for what felt like hours, the landscape shifting and changing around me, becoming more twisted and nightmarish with each step. The sky darkened, the ground beneath my feet growing more unstable, as if it might crumble away at any moment. But I pressed on, driven by the knowledge that my family was somewhere in this forsaken place, waiting for me. Finally, I saw it, a small, dilapidated house, standing alone in the middle of the desolate landscape. It was the same house I had lived in with my family, but it was twisted, distorted, as if viewed through a funhouse mirror. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The windows were dark, the door hanging off its hinges, but I could feel their presence inside, calling out to me. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior of the house was even more twisted than the exterior. The walls were warped, the floor slanted at odd angles, and the air was thick with a suffocating darkness. But I could see them, Sarah, Emma, and Jake, huddled together in the center of the room, their eyes wide with fear. "Sarah!" I cried out, rushing toward them. But as I approached, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. It was a man, tall, thin, with eyes like black holes, and a smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and menacing. "This is not your place." "My family," I said, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "I'm here to take them back." The man's smile widened, and he shook his head. "They belong to me now. You have no power here." But I refused to back down. "I'm not leaving without them." The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the twisted house. "You think you can defy me? You think you can break the anchor?" I held up the box the woman had given me, my hands shaking. "I know I can." For a moment, the man's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the box, but then his expression hardened, and he took a step toward me. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his voice cold and filled with malice. "You don't understand the power you're up against." But I didn't care. I had come too far, fought too hard, to turn back now. I opened the box, and a blinding light filled the room, driving the darkness back, forcing the man to retreat. "Sarah! Emma! Jake!" I called out, my voice filled with determination. "Come to me." But as they started to move toward me, the man let out a roar of rage, and the house began to shake, the walls closing in, the floor buckling beneath us. "You will never leave this place," the man screamed, his voice filled with fury. "You will be trapped here forever, just like them." But I refused to give in to his threats. I focused on the love I had for my family, the bond that had brought me here, and I channeled that energy into the box. The light grew brighter, the man's screams filling the air, and I could feel the anchor, the thing that had trapped my family in this nightmare, starting to weaken. With one final burst of energy, I shattered the anchor, the light exploding outward, consuming the man, the house, and the entire twisted landscape. And then, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the floor of my living room, the morning light streaming through the windows. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a horrible, twisted nightmare. But then I heard it, the sound of laughter, of footsteps running down the hallway. I sat up, my heart pounding, and saw them, Sarah, Emma, and Jake, standing in the doorway, their faces filled with joy and relief. "Daddy!" Emma cried out, running toward me, her arms outstretched. I scooped her up, tears streaming down my face, as Jake and Sarah joined us, wrapping their arms around me in a tight embrace. "We were so scared," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We didn't know if we'd ever see you again." "It's okay," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "We're together now, we're safe." And as I held them close, I knew that no matter what had happened, no matter how dark the journey had been, we had made it through. We were home. A month passed, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after what we'd been through. The house was filled with laughter again, the sound of Emma and Jake playing, Sarah's soft humming in the kitchen. But something still felt off. I tried to push it aside, telling myself that it was just the lingering effects of the trauma, that it would fade with time, but the feeling only grew stronger, gnawing at the edges of my mind. One night, as I lay in bed beside Sarah, I heard it again, the faint whisper that had haunted me for so long, but this time, it was different. It wasn't pleading, it was warning me. "John, wake up." I jolted upright, my heart pounding. I turned to look at Sarah, but she was fast asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I listened, my ears straining for any sound, but the house was silent. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the remnants of the nightmare I'd lived through, but the whisper was so clear, so insistent, that I couldn't ignore it. "Wake up, John, before it's too late." My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the voice. It wasn't Sarah, it was my own voice, distorted and distant, like it was coming from far away. I looked around, my eyes wide, searching for the source of the voice, but the room was empty. And then, in a flash, everything came flooding back. The twisted house, the man with the black hole eyes, the blinding light from the box. But this time, something was different. I wasn't in my bed, I was still in that house. The realization hit me like a freight train, the walls of the bedroom warping and twisting around me as the truth unraveled in my mind. This wasn't my life, this wasn't real. I never made it out, I was still trapped. The whisper grew louder, more desperate, as the room around me started to dissolve, the walls turning to ash, the bed beneath me crumbling away. "Wake up, John!" But I couldn't wake up. I was already awake, in the nightmare, in the trap. I looked down at Sarah, at the children who had joined us in our illusion of safety, and I realized with a cold, sinking feeling that they weren't real either. They were just another part of the trap, the anchor that kept me tied to this place. "No," I whispered, horror clawing at my throat as the world around me disintegrated. "No, this can't be real." But it was. I had never escaped. The man with the black hole eyes had never let us go. And now, as the last remnants of my illusion crumbled away, I could see him standing there, his smile widening as he stepped forward, his voice low and mocking. "You were never going to leave, John," he said, his words echoing in the darkness. "You belong to me now." And as his laughter filled the void, I realized with a final, sinking dread that I would never see my family again. Because they were never real. I was trapped, lost in the nightmare, forever searching for a family that had never existed. And I would never wake up. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more horror stories.